so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
In the saddle till the job's done right.
Welcome to Burnin' Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. Well, howdy there, daylight burners. Hope you all have had a good weekend. It's Sunday afternoon here in Nevada, and I'm speaking with an author by the name of John Yearwood. About halfway through his book, Jar of Pennies, and we're going to talk about some small town drama.
Well, hi, Matt. I'm welcome. I'm glad to be with you. Thank you for welcoming me to your show.
You betcha. I'm excited to see where this conversation goes, because I think this is a really interesting story, and this is all based off of a true story. Am I correct?
That's right. In fact, and I don't think I've told this to anybody else, but I met the killer. You've met him now. We're calling him Jesse Grinder, and that, of course, is not his real name. But I owned a newspaper in a little East Texas town, and one night the press broke down, and I got a frantic call about 4:30 in the morning from the guy that was handling my distribution for my newspaper. Saying, the press is late, and if we don't get some help down here, we're not going to make the post office. You had to have all the newspapers to the post office by a certain time of the day in order to get them delivered in time for the breaking ads that were all the grocery store ads in particular that came out on Thursday. And so he called me. He said, we need help down here. And I said, okay, I'm on my way. He said, yeah, but also we're going to need some more people. He says, and I happen to know this guy who could use a job. And would it be okay for me to call him and get him to come over here this time of the morning and go to work for us? And I said, yeah, sure. Give him a call. So the guy shows up down there, and I get to meet him, and my distribution manager comes to me a minute or two later, and he says, now look, John, he says, I know you've got a little 7-year-old daughter at home. He said, whatever you do not leave your daughter alone with this man. And I thought, oh my God, what, who is this? And I didn't see him again. I didn't see him again for another 10 years. We got the paper out, everything worked fine. But then I read about or heard about this murder. And it is a horrible, horrible murder. And completely senseless, had absolutely no reason for happening. There wasn't any anger, there wasn't nothing. This guy had just, like my character, Jesse Grinder, this guy was just hungry, and he was going to go break into a neighbor's house and steal some food. And he broke in because he thought the woman had left, and she hadn't, or she came back unexpectedly. So that's where you are in the book. She's about to walk back into her trailer while he's in there, about to go through her refrigerator, and man, everything starts falling like dominoes after that.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, based on how everything's going, being East Texas, it's kind of a little hillbilly country, I guess. Is kind of not so much hillbilly, but like kind of backwoods.
Oh yeah, it's isolated. I call it the pine curtain. Where you are in Nevada, you can go to your door and you can see a horizon.
Yeah.
But and people who live in Nevada, and even in West Texas, boy, they go to East Texas and they feel claustrophobic.
Oh,
because
I'd tell you.
you can't see more than 100 yards in any direction.
I was telling some people on our senior trip we went down to Biloxi, Mississippi, and I
Yeah,
grew up in southeast Colorado, out on the plains. So yeah,
yeah,
it's the old joke is you can watch your dog run away for 3 days, and then we were going through East Texas, and it's just like a tunnel of pine trees, just really tall pine trees, and that's like the
yeah,
only light is just right there down the road.
yeah. It only shines. The light only shines, and where the light goes off of the road, it hits those trees. Well,
Mm-hmm.
all the vegetation in the world grows right there along the road where it's got light. It's,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like a 40-foot barrier there of solid briars and bushes and whatever, and then you step through it, and the woods begin to open up. It's really beautiful, but as we say, there is no horizon, and the result of that is I think people end up feeling insulated
Mm-hmm.
and not part of the bigger picture in the United States. So, in the sense that hillbilly is somebody who's isolated from the larger culture, that's true. Um,
Mm-hmm. It's
but
very
then
similar to like the hollers in West Virginia and stuff.
it's similar. It is
Yeah.
it is it is similar. Um, but the vegetation's different,
Mm-hmm.
and the livelihoods are different. This is a place where lumbering is basically the only source of income.
Mm-hmm.
We have tried for 100 years to figure out. I'm meaning people who live in East Texas, have tried for 100 years to figure out a way to bring in some kind of industry that would diversify um, the employment situation and give people something to do besides just holding the work handle of an axe.
Mm-hmm.
And of course nowadays it's all machinery. They don't actually use saws anymore or axes. But
Mm-hmm.
most of those attempts have been shallow or have failed. The only really permanent one we've managed to achieve has been to put in a state prison.
It sounds a lot like Eastern Colorado.
Yeah,
It's you either subsidy farm or insurance farm, I guess is a better term for it. Where they're hoping they actually don't raise a crop so they can just collect the insurance on it,
right.
or they put in these private prisons, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a lot, and of course the drugs are pretty bad in those towns too. So
Oh yes, yeah. It does get bad, and the guys that working in the prison, they're getting berated and propositioned all day long by prisoners who want them to bring drugs to them
mm-hmm.
with these grandiose promises of help from the outside and who knows what.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough. It's tough for them. It is tough for them. I lived in the little town in East Texas for about a decade and a half, running my newspaper. But I had also married a girl who grew up there,
Mm-hmm.
and I want everybody to understand that the town that I create in my book, that's fiction. It's not the town where she and I lived, and the newspaper reporter that's in the book, that's not me. That's a made up character. The people who work in the newspaper office in this fictional town, those are all invented characters. They're
Mm-hmm.
not me. Um, but all that aside, it's been, I guess the easiest way to talk about East Texas is to say that it has a unique character. It's 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 kind of that meeting ground where that sense of West Texas independence runs headfirst into that sense of deep South nostalgia,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a happy marriage. You have that independent spirit fighting with this desire for some kind of feudal society where people who are rich are automatically entitled to privilege that
Mm-hmm.
nobody else can do illegal things.
Yep.
that other people can't get away with. So it's interesting. I really did enjoy my time there, and the people, many of the people are just absolutely fascinating. They're great, great folks.
It's interesting for me because growing up where I did, it's mostly whites and Mexicans is kind of the the demographics that we have. There's a lot of people that would be nowadays be considered kind of racist, but it wasn't because they thought the blacks were worse off than them. It's almost they were like a novelty because you just didn't see them anywhere except on TV.
Right.
And so when you saw black people in person, like every little kid in the town where I grew up would stare, and it's rude, but like they didn't mean anything by it. It's just like it's a novelty almost. And so getting to know some black, I had our family adopted my brother from Haiti, so he was the one black kid in town for most of growing up, and so you get to notice a little bit of that. But then we also weren't in slave country either. Like it was
right.
We were the Wild West.
Right.
So that's that whole racism thing. Like it's there present on with the Mexicans a little bit, but it's nothing like the South. And I've talked to I was in the barbershop in Denver, and a black guy from Atlanta, and then kind of grew up in rural Georgia too. And he talks about how there's some real like pockets of just like deeply racist people still. For the most part, people get along, but we got to remember it wasn't that long ago that in the grand scheme of things that there were people enslaved, and people don't forget either. That's the
right.
thing.
Right. Right. I met a man when I first moved there who had been a slave. He was over 100 years old.
Huh.
But he owned a mule, and he had a plot of land and a little cabin, and he had been living right there since the Civil War, and farming with his mule, and he made enough money to buy his necessities and keep himself fed and going and have a little family, and that's what he did every day. He got up and he went to work. He was blind when I met him, mm-hmm. but he lived in the same spot for so long they knew his way around, so he didn't really need his eyes to tell him what to do. Mm-hmm. And the mule knew how to pull the plow. Mules eventually learn the routine, and they will follow it through.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah. William Faulkner says a mule will work for you for 10 years for the opportunity to kick you once. And
that's about right. That's about right.
But they're not all that way. So
no, my dad had I guess he still does, old Marvin the Mule. My dad ran for the U.S. House there in Colorado, and back in '96 he ran as an independent. And he did all of his campaigning on horseback. So he had his horse, and he took his mule up and down eastern Colorado, and from us there in the southeast corner all the way up to Fort Collins, and he rode, I think, somewhere around 1,500 miles that summer campaigning, and got like 2% of the vote, but he had a good time. But I think it was the Greeley Tribune endorsed Marvin the Mule for the U.S. House because they said the Republican was corrupt, the Democrat was way too left, and my dad didn't stand a chance because he's an independent, so they endorsed Marvin the Mule. And I think there's something missing in today's culture about having like that regional flavor in the press. It's all like big conglomerates anymore, and
right. I agree.
So I'm enjoying like hearing the inside a small town newspaper while reading this book as well. So I got to congratulate you. It's a very, very interesting, easy to read book, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So
thank you.
I'll finish. It'll be I've got about 10 different books that I've started and not finished yet, but I'm gonna make sure and finish this one because it's a good read, and I wanna know how it all turns out. And I guess for a little background, this is like a fairly recent story as far like within the last 20 years or so.
Well, yeah. The actual murderer, the one I told you about meeting, he was executed in the year 2000.
Okay.
So you can back that up and figure out that he's probably in jail for 8 to 12 years before that happened. And while all the appeals run through their processes. So yeah, but it was pretty soon after the murders that he was convicted.
I see.
Yeah. So yes. So the actual murder occurred in, I think, 92.
Okay.
But I've got the story set in 79, 80, that period, because that seemed to me to be a watershed point. The beginning of the Reagan presidency just changed the nature of the country completely. And man, people who were not alive in 1980 don't remember what it was like to have a prime interest rate of 21%. But it was pretty rough.
Yeah, I was born in 85, and my my folks, I've heard stories about the interest rates, and then you had the fuel crisis in the 70s, and kind of mirrors about what we're going through today. And
Right.
Yeah, it was a rough time, and it's weird how I think it was it Mark Twain that said history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And that's that's kind of what it feels like. There's this point in time we're at right now. I can't decide if it looks like the Weimar Republic or pre World War I, or as well as, I don't know. There's been a bunch of different flavors of all. Either way, it's not great.
Well, it seems unsettled, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard from some friends in Germany yesterday that they are stockpiling food because they think there's going to be a massive food shortage in Germany or in Europe this winter, and there probably will be. Yeah,
they're saying that firewood is coincidentally firewood is going to be like the new gold in Germany. Because it's going to be a rough winter, it sounds like.
Yep, I'm afraid it is. I'm afraid it's going to be rough for the whole world.
I think so. I think it's going to be a little tough. But getting back to the book, though, so what's it like running a small town newspaper? I mean, I can't imagine that like you're either people's best friends or their worst enemy, depending on how you're reporting.
Yeah, and sometimes that can happen in the same week.
I bet so.
So I'll tell you I'll tell you a little story. It's not in the book, but I'll tell you a little side story. There was a man who and his wife who decided they would try to pass a forged prescription at a local drugstore.
Okay.
So they went in, and the wife stayed in the car while he went in to pass the prescription. And time passed, and suddenly a police car pulls up in the lot right next to her, and so she cranks the car, and a minute later, here he comes out of the drugs. The policemen have gotten out of their car. Here he comes out of the drugstore, jumps in the front seat, and says, "Go, go, go!" So she takes off. Well, you know what had happened is that the pharmacist had called the police and said, "We got this guy trying to pass this forged prescription for some amphetamines or something, And so he takes off. Well, the police come running back out of the drugstore. They get in their car. Their sirens are going. They're chasing, and the woman is doing all kinds of crazy maneuvers with the car, cutting through parking lots, driving on the wrong side of the road, going back and forth. And meanwhile, every other police car and all of the volunteer firemen are suddenly converging in this same spot, and they're all chasing this woman who's going every which way and cutting corners. And she finally gets out on the highway and dashes down the highway about 7 miles and makes a screeching left turn across oncoming traffic onto a dirt road, fishtails down the road, ends up at a trailer. Well, that's her trailer. And the two of them bail out of the trailer and go dashing in and lock the door of the trailer just as the DPS and the local sheriffs and the city police and probably 100 guys with the volunteer fire department, who, they're not law officers, they just emergency responders, and they all surround the trailer, and the couple barricade themselves inside, and you can see the husband. He'll pull aside the curtain, and he's got a gun. He's got his little boy held under his neck with a gun pointed at his head, threatening to kill the boy. And all this goes on for 7 or 8 hours, 9 hours. Finally, they talk. Nobody gets hurt. Finally, they talk this guy out. They talk the wife out. Everybody agrees to lay down their guns, and it's all solved. So that's a good story. Don't you think? Don't you think that's a good story? So
I think so.
So I ran that story, pretty much told in that way, in the next week's paper. I got a telephone call from that boy's mother that melted the telephone receiver. She cussed me out. She told me I had ruined his life by writing that story.
You were the one that ruined the life, not him by sticking a gun to his boy's head. That didn't ruin his life.
Or trying to pass a forged prescription, but it's my fault.
Yeah.
That's okay. So that's what it's like. People don't like to be caught doing stuff. And I think, as I say in the book, nobody actually reads the local newspaper to see who got caught.
Yeah.
They just read the local newspaper to see who got caught at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. Living in a small town, everybody, you recognize. It's just like I'm sure where you live in Nevada or where you lived in Colorado, everybody's vehicle. You recognize their license plates. Nobody takes the keys out of their ignition, because who's gonna steal your car? No, and nobody locks their doors, and everybody's name and their names of their wives and their children and their pets and where they go to school, where they work, and you go to the grocery store, there'll be 200 people in there, and every one of them. I would go on trips with the county commissioners. If all of us went together, all 4 commissioners and me went together, then nobody could call it a secret meeting. But if they went, the 4 of them in the same vehicle together, then people could accuse them of holding a meeting in secret. So under the open meetings law, they needed somebody to ride along with them, and that way they could save money on transportation, wouldn't all have to go in separate vehicles. So I'd go with them on these places, and we'd be riding down the road, and one of them would look off to the side and say, "Now, isn't that the place so-and-so began stealing the telephone wires to collect the copper?" And the other one would say, "Yeah, and he was the son of so-and-so, and they have a fight over this." And before you know it, all 4 commissioners are just rattling off the genealogies of the people in the county. And it goes on and on and on. At one time, I thought they were just trying to make me go to sleep. I thought they were just trying to bore me to death. But no, as it turns out, this is an important part of living in a small place, is you do have to understand what the relationships are between people.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So you can't just move in from outside not knowing anyone and make it. You've got to, if you're going to move in from outside, you've got to make friends, and you've got to start studying the family relationships, and you've got to know who's having a good time with who, and who's fighting with whom, and where the family feuds are, and where the skeletons are. Um, so I mean, it's living in a small town is a full-time experience.
Oh yeah.
Um, you learn so much about being human. Um, I'll tell you another story to illustrate that point. I'm not keeping you too long, am I? Can we
No,
go on?
no.
Oh yeah, okay.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm
okay,
I'm free for the day, so we'll
good.
talk as long as you want.
Okay, so I'll tell you another story. Uh, in in this little town where I had my newspaper, I met two women. Both of them were named Ruby.
Mm-hmm.
One Ruby was wealthy beyond imagining. Um, she was her husband and family owned a string of department stores in Houston and Dallas and New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and they made a lot of money. They made
Mm-hmm.
a ton of money, and they were the only people I met who were not dependent upon the lumber industry for income. Um, and so they were sort of insulated from the economic ups and downs of the community. Well, they had an architect come in and build them an absolutely gorgeous house, 3-story house with an atrium that went all the way to a glass ceiling in the top and a large downstairs thing. And this Ruby had been classically trained, and she had been a ballerina in her youth, and she was a concert level pianist, and she had twin grand pianos side by side in her living room there under that beautiful atrium. And she would invite other friends who could play, and they would get together and they would have these little concerts. It was classy. It was
Mm-hmm.
classy. It was beautiful. She was cultured, educated, and she was beautiful. She was a beautiful woman. In her 70s, she was absolutely stunning. The other Ruby had been married 5 times. The second and fourth times to the same man,
Oh.
who 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 had gotten angry with her over something, probably money, since that's generally what people get angry with one another over,
Mm-hmm.
and had taken an open end wrench to her face and had beaten her face into a pulp and knocked out all her teeth.
Oof.
And the result of that was, well, she did divorce him after that. But the other result was she lost all her teeth, and by that point was enough of a trauma to flip her over the edge into full blown paranoid schizophrenia. And
Mm.
she ended up basically living on the street as a paranoid schizophrenic, appealing for help to everyone. Just a little change here, just a little change there. And the only homeless person in the town,
Mm-hmm.
you know, well, it was a small town. There's 2,500 people. So 1 in 2,500 is not bad. But
Yeah.
yeah, you multiply it by 10 million and you've got a lot of homeless people. But, so she ended up coming to coming into my office one day, and I listened to her. I listened to her talk and listened to her rant and rave. And the more I listened, the calmer she got. And I realized, this woman is crazy, but basically she just needs somebody to care about her.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I'd start looking out after her and make sure she had food, and found her a place to stay. And eventually I bought her a little $500 pickup that she could get around in. And things went on like that. But it always struck me as ironic that the only two women named Ruby that I knew would be at such opposite ends
Mm.
of the social and mental scale. And it was as though they were bookends for the entire human experience. On the one hand, you have this poor woman who's destitute, toothless, living on the street with nothing, no food. And on the other, you have this fabulously wealthy, beautiful woman with cultured and educated and and it's just everybody else exists in a continuum between those two extremes. And the longer I thought about it, the more I realized that that's what it really means to live in a small town, is that you get to know everything about what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm.
You get to know everything. You get to see people struggling to make a life for themselves, trying to create a community and a civilization, trying to figure out how to keep their kids from getting in trouble, and entertaining the children and educating them to grow up to be decent human beings. And it's not an easy job, but it's worthwhile. It's who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I loved about living in a small town. You not only did you know everyone, but you also had this wonderful window into understanding who and what humans are, both singly and in groups. I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. Yeah.
Now, where did you come from originally?
Well, I'm the product of a military family.
So everywhere.
So yeah, I was born in Hawaii, of all places. I've lived in Munich and Washington, D.C., and Shreveport and New Orleans and San Antonio and Austin twice, and Hawaii and Honolulu, and on the island of Maui. So that's, I mean, I've had a fairly large exposure to the United States and a good part of the Western Europe. I lived in England for a year on a fellowship to Cambridge. So yeah, all over. My wife is from East Texas, and
okay,
her family goes back 6 or 7 generations. Her grandmother was born in 1856. So if that gives you any indication, in Roan's Prairie. Yeah. So
that's crazy.
It's crazy.
I grew up in Dust Bowl country, where Boise City, Oklahoma is considered the geographic center of the Dust Bowl, and my little sister was born there. I grew up just about 45 minutes from the center of the Dust Bowl. And all my just everybody my age, like their whole family's existence is like all revolved around how bad the Depression and the Dust Bowl was. And and it was and it's strangely enough, like they weren't hit with as many draft notices as as the urban centers, because a lot of the men got deferments for farming or whatever. And so World War II was a little different for folks out there. There were still plenty of people that served, but not nearly the density of the urban centers. And it's funny, like that whole like you don't waste not, want not, you don't throw something away because you never know when you're going to need it later. That was just drilled into everybody's head at a very early age.
Mine too.
It's it's funny how I don't know, just looking back, and it just amazes me, just like we get so we have such a different view of the world than the rest of the world, because we're so much newer than the rest of the world. I mean, it's outside of the natives, like, who have an ancient culture, but the rest of the U.S. is brand new compared to the rest of the world. And and we don't have, sometimes we don't get the understanding of, we don't look at the rest of the world like we would little cliques in a small town. I think that's a lot better way to look at how the world interacts with each other, because there's you listen to a lot of guys that went over to Iraq and Afghanistan and fought, and they talk about how there was never going to be a cohesive government, because they'd give some money to the locals, and they would use that money to get back on another person for some feud that was like 8 generations ago over a goat, and and so I just like, and it's like that everywhere in the world. And you're just like, people don't forget. And like this whole Russia-Ukraine deal is so much more complicated than just, Putin invading. Like the whole thing is just, it's a nightmare. And when you look at the, for all the faults of the founders, they had some really incredible wisdom. And in Washington, when he left and talked about the danger of political parties, and then also entangling alliances overseas. And boy, if we're not seeing that right now, how dangerous that gets. I mean, man.
Right. Yeah. Well, and under in Washington's time, every problem that occurred in Europe was a family feud. Because they were all interrelated. They were still interrelated until World War One.
I know, and they'd send a couple, 100,000 people to go fight because two cousins were pissed at each other.
Right.
It was wild.
Yeah. Right. Turn the ground into mud made from blood. Yeah.
Yeah, because two second cousins were in a feud, and it was
right.
It was insane. And now we do it over because two corporations are in a feud or something like that, and instead of cousins.
Yeah. Well, and you're right about the Putin Ukraine thing too. That's in some ways that's a family feud. I didn't realize it, but Russia comes from the name of the people who originally occupied Ukraine, the Rus people, R-U-S. So that's in some ways that's the Russian homeland,
and Kiev was like the traditional capital of.
Right. Yeah. Right. So,
And the whole Crimea situation, the only reason it's part of Ukraine now is because Khrushchev, or was part of Ukraine, was because Khrushchev gave it away in a drunken poker game.
Right.
And so it's just like one of the more like profound historical figures in human history. It was a drunken poker game, and he gives away this whole peninsula. And it's like, at the end of the day, people are just people. It's there's good ones and bad ones, but then they're still just people.
Yeah, they are just people. They are indeed. They are indeed. Yeah.
It's funny. Now you've got some other books out as well, don't you?
I do. I have 3 other books in print. The 3 that are in print, the Icarus Jump, City in here. I've got copies of them here.
Okay.
Icarus Jump. City in the Gate. And the Gender of Fire. Okay. And all 3 of these have the same characters in them, and they're basically a series. It's a sequence. It's a sequence. Icarus Jump is first, and it's about a 21st century Army Ranger who's left the service and is working now as a contractor. Working with NATO to do some experimental parachute glider kinds of things. Well, and then what happens is that he goes on a nighttime jump near some outpost of Russia's to see if Russia will track his jump. And of course they can't see him; he's too small. But he blacks out. And he wakes up as he gets tossed around as he leaves the airplane, and he blacks out. And when he wakes up, he doesn't know where he is. He knows where he should be, but this thing had a peroxide rocket motor attached to it, so that he could penetrate deeply into other, the background of an enemy and do stuff behind the enemy lines. That was the whole point of developing this weapon. And but the rocket's gone. so he must have fired the rocket while he was unconscious, or it went off as he lost consciousness. He has no idea where he is. He could be within 600 miles of the spot where the airplane dropped him off. So he comes down and he's in the mountains, and he's not real sure, but he thinks he's in the Peloponnese Peninsula of Greece. And he comes down and he lands. He lands in a pool on the side of a mountain, and his clothes are wet. And it's warm enough. He takes them all off and makes a little camp for himself. Figures the rescue helicopter will be along in the morning. Goes to sleep. When he wakes up, he sees some women coming down the side of the hill. They're going to go bathe in that pool and so on. But and then he sees some guys armed with spears, of all things, come sneaking out of the brush with the clear intent of attacking the women. One thing leads to another, and it turns out he's about 2,000 years in the past, or 4,000 years, and he's 2000 BC in Bronze Age Greece. So so here you have this army ranger, right, suddenly thrust into the middle of what ends up being a Bronze Age war, and the women that he decides to protect, well, they are representatives of a matriarchal society.
Huh.
And if you know anything about the Rangers, you know that there aren't any female Rangers to speak of.
No.
I think there's only been 2 that have passed the test, and they didn't stay in the Rangers once they did. So, and the Rangers have been around since 1787 or something.
Somewhere around that.
Or 1777 maybe. So only 2 women in all that period. And so suddenly here he is in a matriarchal society, and he has to learn to adapt. And he doesn't have any guns. He doesn't have any explosive. Well, what good is a gun when you run out of ammo? It's the same as a rock,
Yeah.
So
and not as easy to throw.
No, you get the wrong angle at it. Anyway, things rock along, and he explores the culture. He saves the women. He saves the city that they belong to, and that's Icarus Jump. And then in the city in the gate, the enemies that he's saving the city from end up invading in a massive force, and he's got to use his army training to help organize a group of people. And well, they've already got an army, and they've got generals, and they've got captains, and they're used to doing things their way. So the women who run the city say, okay, well, you can take these girls over here and you can make them into a fighting force. Well, he does. And his experience training a group of women, of young women who are offspring of a matriarchal society, you can expect them to be fairly headstrong.
I would imagine.
And kind of set in their ways. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah. And so he manages to train them as a decent fighting force. They have some some good action scenes in there. They've got to rescue some people. They have to destroy an access point that the army is using to invade, and they pull all that off. Exploits galore, and that was fun to write.
I bet.
And then in this one, he's still there. He's still with the city, and as it turns out, there are too many. The invading army is too large, and they can't hold them off. They're going to lose the city, and so he figures out how to get them, how to rescue them, get them evacuated, and eventually leads them across the wild lands of the southern Peloponnese until they finally reach the seashore, where they have to fight off pirates. And then, it goes on and on. It's just a little adventure story, and it was fun to write.
Sounds like it. I'll have to check those out.
Yeah. Ultimately, I'll come back to it. I think I'm going to get these people across the ocean to Italy, and I think they'll become the first Etruscans. I think this is basically an origin myth for the Etruscans. So
I take it you're a student of history as well.
well, I am, and I read a lot. So I don't know. We've got probably 10,000 books in our library downstairs. So
My mom was a high school librarian, so I was big on reading, and I was like a Civil War nerd. I've always enjoyed just military strategy and stuff. So and so the Civil War was always interesting to me. How more than anything, just like how inept both sides were. I mean, the Southerners had some really good generals, but if you look at Robert E. Lee, people loved him, but he didn't win that much.
That's right. That's right. He didn't really get very far out of Virginia either, when you think about it.
No, and his best general, Stonewall Jackson, was shot by his own troops.
By his own men. Yeah. Died because his own men shot him. Well, he was out there scouting the no man's land between the two armies, and
got shot by his picket.
And got shot by his picket forces. Yeah. And after that, Stonewall Jackson's greatest strategy was always get the high ground for your cannon, and that's what he did. And he taught math and became an absolute champion at artillery. But
there was an anecdote about him, and I don't know if there's any truth to it, but he had always he was very devoutly religious guy, and
he was.
Before battle, he would he'd always put his right hand up, and the troops thought he was because he's praying or something. But turns out like he would do that to let the blood drain out of his arm or something. It was like he'd get a tingling feeling or something. So if he'd raise his arm up for a couple minutes, it would go away, and it was nothing more than that. But it was like this big moment for his troops, and his troops, they loved him. So it was it was interesting how just it kind of reminds me of the festival that you wrote about, and where all the senior girls in there talk about tradition, and nobody knows why, but they're big on tradition, and
right, it's all they've got.
Yeah,
it's all they've got.
Yeah, it's funny how that is all through history. Just like it makes history way more interesting when you realize like people are just people, like no matter how great, how or whatever.
Yeah.
Or small, just like they're still just people.
Yeah, right. And that was one of the reasons I wrote those first books. It's because you go back 4,000 years and you're still just dealing with people. They're just people. Take their clothes off, and they're the same.
Yep.
There may be some difference in body size based on nutrition.
Yeah.
But other than that, or deformity based on disease, but other than that, people are people. And in fact, I think I make that point in the first chapter of A Jar of Pennies.
I think so. Yeah.
It's not the history that repeats, but people are always the same. People are always the same. The only thing that changes are our methods.
Methods, ideas, and that's about it. Right. And sometimes the ideas don't change all that much either. Like they'll. Right. It's just put a new wrapper on it.
Right. Well, and I think the Civil War is one example of that. People are still fighting that war.
Yeah.
The Confederate flag being carried into the Capitol on January 6th. I think that was an indication of how that war is still going on. It's we may have declared it over, but it's not over.
Well, and it was never really resolved very well.
Right.
It just and that's I keep harkening back to Sherman. Like Sherman was one of the bigger sons of bitches that have ever lived. But he's also 100% right when he talks about war. Like you don't win a war unless you are willing to kill every man, woman, and children to defeat them. Like that's just part of it. And
right.
And then, he, And when we've seen that through our foreign policy over the past, 50 years, 50, 80 years, like you can't go in and just like take little half measures yeah, you have to like go scorched earth.
Right. You can't leave your enemy alive,
Mm-hmm.
and expect the war to end. And that's why you don't want to fight wars if you can avoid it.
Right.
Because really, honestly, the United States does not have the moral depravity it takes to win wars.
No, I don't think so either.
We don't have the moral depravity. You have to be somebody like Putin, who's willing to kill women and children and hospital invalids and old people, and just basically kill everybody, or you're not going to win.
Right.
And we certainly saw that in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And, you talk about an 8th generation feud over a goat. Well, what's the solution? Kill both sides.
Yeah.
Right? Kill both sides.
Yeah.
That's the only solution. If what you're looking for is complete resolution.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the United States has some great strengths, and among those are education, medicine, and technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do believe that we're probably downplaying our strengths in a lot of places where we ought to be emphasizing them. Food.
Yeah.
If you can provide food to people, you're their friend.
Oh yeah.
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 Food and energy, both. I mean, we're getting ready to be real friendly with Germany on this natural gas deal. Well, friendly they're going to buy a bunch from us. I don't know how much they're going to like us when they pay the cost of it, but that's I think that's something that people are really sleeping on is it kind of gets pushed by the wayside because this Ukraine deal is just awful like that. There has to be some sort of resolution to that soon, or it's. But Germany is putting in like $100 billion into their military, and I know, like Germany with a big military usually doesn't bode well for the rest of the world,
Well, yeah, it ought to be bothering the French. That's for sure.
It ought to. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, are the French and the Germans ever going to get along? I don't think they will. And
well, the national characters are pretty different. So.
Yeah,
I think uneasy neighbors, right?
I think people are sleeping on that little deal. Like I said, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. And fool us 3 times, I think the world's over.
Right.
It's I don't know. That whole deal over there is looking not great. And
no, it's not.
But I think you're right. We're really downplaying our energy capacity too. I mean, for all the climate change stuff and whatnot, like it's pretty obvious that the green energy stuff is not ready for prime time at the moment. And we're sitting on the biggest oil reserves in the world, and we're not hardly using them. Right.
And there are some pretty weak countries around us that could, like Venezuela, that have huge oil reserves too. That we better be paying attention to.
Yeah,
because other people in the world will want those reserves, and Venezuela cannot defend itself.
No, and there's no real reason why we shouldn't be friendly with them. That's the big thing. Is like,
well, what was it? He said, "It's the odor of Satan."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reason for them not to be friendly with us, but for as far as on our end, like we should be trying to be friendly with them, and it's it's really stupid to have an enemy that close to us, it'd be way rather to have a good trading relationship with them. Well, Ron Paul always says where goods cross borders, troops don't, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Well, there's a good bit of truth to it. Of course, are some pretty significant political differences.
Yeah, they are,
between
obviously.
so so it's not easy, and thank God I was not the one who was put in the position of trying to make those kinds of decisions.
Oh man, yeah. I don't know if there is a winning in that situation even.
I mean, God put me where I am, and this is fine. I don't need to be solving the world's problems.
I feel the same way. I like talking about them and kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, but at the same time, it's a good time to live in rural Nevada,
Yeah, right.
It's a really good time. Every time I see all the nonsense going on in the cities, I'm just like, man, I'm love it or hate it. It's a good time to live in a small town.
Right.
And
right. I agree.
But yeah, it's
I wanted to get back to small town stuff.
Yes.
I told you that I lived in East Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the county that we lived in was almost well, it was a little over 1,000 square miles.
Okay.
So that's big.
Yeah.
But if you take all of the farms and the paved roads and private property, houses and yards and
mm-hmm.
government buildings, schools, you add all that up, all of it, you get about 70 square miles.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 930 square miles were pine forest.
Mm-hmm.
So there you are. That's the kind of place we were talking about. And it's deep woods. There's an area over there you may not have heard of called the Big Thicket. And in the news these days, there's all this talk about that giant asteroid that struck off of Yucatan and killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Well, it did a lot of stuff, but if you look at the geography of the Gulf does look like a large crater, don't you think? And if you look at the geography and how the ground settled, you go from sea level, and basically you don't have much of a rise for the first 30 miles from the water. And then you begin to have some gradual hills. And then you have a ring of hills that goes through Louisiana and all the way over into central Texas. But 60 miles from the Gulf, that land rises to 780 feet above sea level.
Okay.
That's the highest point. That's the highest point between the Gulf of Mexico and the Ozark Mountains.
Huh.
And what happened during the last ice age is that everything that was alive in North America, when the ice age began, moved south to avoid the cold. And they got to that 780 foot high ridge and they went over it and they settled down towards the water.
Mm-hmm.
Well, over 100,000 years, that ice melted away.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't leave. Those plant and animal species did not follow the retreating ice. They stayed there. And it became an area called the Big Thicket. And it was called a thicket because, honest to God, it was a thicket. To get through it, you had to crawl on your hands and knees. And even then, you couldn't get through it. Some places, I've had to hack my way through piles of brambles that were twice as tall as I am.
Huh.
And you get out there, and you're in constant shade. Here and there, there'll be some sunlight getting to the ground. You've got deciduous trees soaking it all up. Pines manage to poke their way above the hardwoods and get to the sunlight above them. In that area, every species of oak tree that grows in North America grows right there.
Really?
And you cross that hill, that 780-foot high hill, and those species of oaks disappear until you get up around Illinois.
Huh.
Yeah, it's crazy. We have cacti down there you wouldn't see anywhere else growing right next to orchids that grow only there and nowhere else in the world. There are 29 species of orchids right there. And
Crazy.
Yeah, and the United Nations recognized that area as a unique biosphere and designated it that. And in the 1970s, the Representative Charlie Wilson spearheaded a move to get the Big Thicket declared a national park, and they did eventually declare it a national park. So there are places where you can go. And
was that where his district was? Is that East Texas area?
That East Texas area. He was basically holed up in Lufkin.
Okay.
Most of his life.
Okay. I knew he was from Texas, but I wasn't for sure where at.
Right. Yeah. He married a girl from Corrigan and then divorced her, but stayed friends with her father, who happened to be Arthur Temple of Temple Inland Industries. So, yeah. So, yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Fascinating area.
I really enjoyed the, just the how you lay out small town. I'm kind of.
Thank you.
I think politics maybe too specific of a word, but I think it fits though, because everything about small towns is politics. I mean, whether
well, that's what politics is, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a bunch of small town politics all concentrated into Washington D.C.
Right. Well, I mean, the word itself comes from Greek, right? Polis, meaning people.
Mm-hmm.
Politics, it's the way people talk to one another.
Yeah, I think so. It's a fascinating book, and I'm looking for. I'm going to read your other ones too. Actually, we get done here, we'll trade information and whatnot. Maybe you can sign a couple copies and send them to me. I'll pay.
I'd be happy to do that.
I'll buy them from you if you'd like. It don't matter, but I'd like to have a couple signed copies, just because I've really enjoyed this conversation. And anytime you want to come back on and promote something or just talk shop, you're more than welcome. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, man. I hope I've made a friend. You sure sound like one, and I'd like to visit with you again.
No, I think it'd be awesome. And I've got a couple ideas for books that I'm eventually I'd like to write. And
good.
And I don't know if you ever heard of Boots O'Neill. He's
yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm friends. I got to become friends with him through this podcast, and I've talked with his daughter, and she's always talked about writing a book. And I thought, well, I've got all this recorded material from Boots, and might as well just put it in his own words. And I think it'd make it a hell of a book. Yeah. And but there's a lot of a lot of ideas I have. But anyway, I've enjoyed your work. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to doing it again. So, your publicist is awesome, by the way. I've worked with her on a couple of the other authors that she represents, and she does a good job. She's very, very efficient and timely. So I've enjoyed having her help set everything up. But
well, sure. I'm lucky to have her. I'm very pleased.
Yeah, she's good. So but yeah, we'll I've got your number and everything, and we'll stay in touch. I've really enjoyed this. We'll have I'll have my theme song play at the end. But if you'll stick around through the end of that, we'll exchange information. And then, but if there's anything else you'd like to, is it Amazon? You got a certain website you want them to go to, or?
The book is being sold on Amazon. It'll be available to bookstores. You can go to a bookstore and order the book now, if you want to. I've also recorded it, so it'll
Oh,
be
perfect.
available. It'll be available on Audible. If you live in rural Nevada, you will have an opportunity to listen to the whole thing.
Yep, that's I Audible is a great thing. I love
Yeah,
that's about how I do most of my reading anymore. I find it hard to find the time to sit down with a physical book and
yeah,
read it. But I spend a lot of time on horseback, and I've always got an earbud in my ear listening to either a
that's
book
great.
or a podcast. I don't know. I'm always curious. I gotta know stuff. So.
Sounds like an ideal life to me.
Yeah, I won't. I don't complain about it too much. I tell you the truth. I complain about a lot of other stuff, but my life in general is pretty all right.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
And how's the demon child? How's she doing?
she's doing good.
Good. All right.
Yeah. So
That's your
yeah,
that's your name for her.
yeah.
Thea, I think is her name. You call her Thea. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sophia, she's awesome. She really does she doesn't slow down at all. She's gonna take
Yeah.
over the world one of these days, I think. But
Is she in school? Is she
yeah,
going to school?
we're homeschooling. We do kind of a co-op, a homeschool co-op through a local church, and
Right.
so they go a couple days a week there. And she's second grade, and then my boy
Perfect.
is he's in first grade. He's 5, she's 7, he's 5, and but they're both very bright kids, and so
Yeah.
I like the homeschooling deal because we can move them along as fast as we want them to, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm big on education. I'm not so much on public education, but a good education's invaluable, and
Man, I tell
I
you, it is. It
it's
is indeed.
I told my little girl that I said it's the cool thing about learning stuff is like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. And
Well, yeah, there's the other part of that is if you don't learn, you end up condemned to ignorance,
mhm,
and then you are victimized by every other person who's
mhm.
smarter than you are.
Yep.
One of the things I do in my spare time is go down and mentor in the reading program at our local elementary school, trying to get kids that are a little slow or a little behind the curve caught up
Yeah,
and able to perform. It's been a very rewarding work, and
I bet.
and they're very appreciative. And those little second graders, boy, they somebody. I'm a big guy,
Mm,
and I'm over 6 feet and over 250 pounds, and I do have a physical presence in a room full of second graders.
I would say so. Yeah,
And as soon as they realize I'm not a threat, we have a really good time, and they learn how to read, and it's a blast. I have a great time doing it.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's really cool. I've been able to do some we've brought the kids out to the all the kids there in that homeschool group. We've had them out to the feedlot where I work a couple times and shown them around, and it's another good thing to like people lose touch with where food comes from too, and
right,
it's
right, yeah,
real easy to demonize the ag industry, and then
right,
but the people that demonize it really don't know anything about what it takes to put
right,
food on the table,
right.
and I think the more people learn about that, the better off it is for us in the rural communities as well as just in general. Like it's a good thing to know where that stuff comes from and how it's made
Sure,
and how it gets there, and so it's neat being able to do that, and and teaching a kid to read. That's I mean, how many generations, centuries of people of just
right,
illiterate people, you
right,
had to believe what the church was telling you or the whoever.
right. Yeah, because the guy who was preaching was the only one in town who could
Mhm,
read. You
right.
know,
Yep.
yeah, and all he could read was Latin.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So it's
Yeah,
there's and it seems like there is it's becoming cooler to be a nerd nowadays too. So it's that it's not a
yeah, that's fun.
people don't necessarily write you off when you say, oh, I like to study history or I like to do, nerdy stuff. So
Yeah.
it's that's a good thing,
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is. Yeah. History is important.
Yeah,
It really
I think
is.
so.
Yeah.
I think so. Well, John, I appreciate your time so
Man.
much. It was a true pleasure. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Go buy the book, Jar of Pennies. If you can get it from a bookstore, that's better. But Amazon does just fine too.
Yep. Amazon will get it to you tomorrow.
There you go. So,
All right, man.
yeah, thanks for tuning in. And like I said, stick around for just a second while we play this
Sure,
song.
man.
But everybody else, move your ass. We're burning daylight.
You rise up in the morning beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horse is kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Well, life is just a gather, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right.